Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this breakout session. Joe has just posted some information in the chat just to let you know that we're recording this session, and if you could keep your cameras and sound off, that would be much appreciated. We're in a meeting room space. We do have some time for Q&A at the end, so you're very welcome to come off mute and come off camera to ask a question if you would like, or post it in the chat. So in this morning's sessions, we're going to be exploring the question, how can family hubs support families seeking sanctuary following conflict and displacement? I'm Julia Mays, I'm the Evidence Implementation Leader here in the National Centre for Family Hubs. Thank you so much for joining us. As a result of war, conflict and lack of resources, the past 10 to 15 years has seen a huge increase in the number of people making life-changing and often treacherous journeys to Europe seeking asylum and refuge. Many asylum seekers and refugees will experience traumatic events and losses after people arrive, difficulties with social isolation, loss of family, community and culture, and challenges accessing social and health services. These difficulties are often compounded by challenges with language and a lack of understanding of the legal processes and their rights as migrants. And our existing support systems are struggling to respond. But an integrated family hub approach offers a potential opportunity to respond more quickly to crisis and meet the sudden changing needs of local populations in a more agile way, improving access to services and providing a more integrated response with relationships at the centre. I'm just going to share some slides now. We've got a brilliant lineup of speakers here with us this morning. We're going to kick off with Professor Rachel Calam from the Division of Psychology and Mental Health at the University of Manchester, who's going to take us through some of the evidence from research. We then have Peter Watt, Acting Head of the Church Street Family Hub, and Sharon Blake, Early Help Family Practitioner in Westminster, who are going to be talking about how integrated family hubs are supporting families in Westminster. Followed by Caroline Herbert, Locality Lead for Children and Families, and Becky Humphreys, Specialist Health Visitor for Complex and Vulnerable Families in Newcastle, talking about how a collaborative approach has strengthened early intervention support in Newcastle. And finally finishing up with Beck Ferrari, who's the Clinical Content Lead at the UK Trauma Council, who's going to be talking us through some of the resources to support families that are available and that the UK Trauma Council are developing. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel now. Rachel, do you want to come off
Hi,
on camera?
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about work that we've been involved in and an opportunity to share the research in this field. What I want to talk about is families, and I'm sure that's what you want to hear about, because families really are the front line of defence for children who are experiencing war, conflict and displacement. Oh, sorry, the slides are changing too quickly. Can we just go back? Back one, please. We know that primary caregivers, we know from the research that primary caregivers can provide a protective shield. So a parent who can provide warmth and support and a harmonious household or family environment can really be highly protective for children. And we know that family interaction is predictive of children's adjustment through war and displacement. Next, please. So how does military conflict affect children? I mean, you'll probably be really aware of this already, but children can very frequently show emotional distress. They can be fearful, anxious, they can be sad. Children will show changes in their behaviour, becoming shy and withdrawn, or the opposite, externalising behaviours, perhaps being unusually active or aggressive. They can show physical changes, stomach aches, headaches, other somatic difficulties. They may show trauma-specific reactions to stress, for example, nightmares and flashbacks, and difficulty with sleeping. Parents may well report that children show more clinging and bedwetting and thumb sucking, and they may show difficulties in concentration. Next, please. What's really important is that there's now much more recognition in the research of the effects of conflict on parenting. It's really that in the last 10 years that the research literature has started to catch up on some of the changes that can be seen in parents through the whole process of anticipation of an armed conflict, war, and then displacement and resettlement. What's really interesting is that when families are under threat, perhaps before a conflict begins, they tend to be more warm and more overprotective with their children. But when the stresses of conflicts and flight overcome them, this can diminish caregiver warmth and increase harsh and coercive family parenting practices. So children may find themselves experiencing not only the changes that are inherent in conflicts and displacement, but also changes in the care that they receive and the parenting that they receive. There's also increasing evidence now that the caregiver's own trauma history and their own difficulties post-migration are associated with greater caregiver PTSD, and that post-traumatic stress disorder is itself associated with more harsh parenting. So you can see chains of effect happening. We do know that parent and caregiver practices can be improved significantly. And I'm going to, when I say parenting, I'm thinking about whoever it is that's the primary carer or carers for the child. We know that children's adjustment can be improved significantly as well. And it's also becoming clear from the literature that trauma-informed programs appear particularly promising. Next slide, please. I wouldn't be giving this talk if it wasn't for the work of my colleague Ala El-Khani, who joined me as a PhD student more than a decade ago, and we're still working together on a number of projects trying to provide support for children who've lived through conflict and displacement. At the start of the Syrian conflict, Ala lost several members of her extended family in Syria, and she was inspired by this experience to try and understand what it's like to be a parent living through conflict and displacement. And so she went and interviewed families in refugee settings, in temporary homes on the Turkey-Syria border. And she did a series of interviews and papers describing what the parents had to say about their experiences. And this, for example, in this quotation, a parent said, "I cannot control anything around me. We're living each second unaware of what's coming next. You ask me what it's like to be a mum now. Well, this is it. It's like we're not mums. We're just keeping kids alive by feeding them and making sure they're alive and safe." Of course, once families arrive in the UK, their challenges are not over. And I think many of the things that she found out about these families who were through talking to these families in Turkey really rings true for families living in the UK. And we followed up her work with families living in Manchester who had fled conflict and displacement and confirmed that that was the case. What she found parents were talking about were exactly the sorts of behavioural changes that I mentioned in my first slide. She said that the parents said that children were hitting, they were spitting, they were showing aggressive behaviour that the parents hadn't seen before. Their children were swearing perhaps, or they might be very withdrawn, very anxious, and they were immensely distressed by all the war-related games that children would play as well. They would play out the conflicts that they had experienced. Next slide, please. What I'm going to describe is a set of evidence-based interventions that we developed, Ala El-Khani and I developed. And when my talk is circulated, you'll see there are links to this, and I'm also sending around a list of references as well, so you can follow up on this. And the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime have worked with us to actually make these interventions available internationally. They form a pyramid from very brief parenting advice, which in the form of leaflets, through a booklet, which is a more detailed form of the leaflet, which provides evidence-based parenting advice, which is trauma-informed and informed by the interviews that Ala did with the parents in Turkey and Syria. Then the next level up is the Strong Families Programme, which is a UNODC-led programme. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's designed for families who are likely to have experienced trauma and who are living in challenged contexts. And that's been used in many, many countries worldwide now. So there's quite an evidence base on that. It's a 3-session programme, so you might be interested in following up on that as well. And then the highest level is TRT, which is Teaching Recovery Techniques, a programme developed by the Children of War Foundation, plus parenting, and we added the plus parenting component. So I'm going to say a little bit about some of those levels. Next slide, please. The idea for the leaflets came from a humanitarian worker in Syria who said that we were talking about and Ella was talking with them about the kinds of information that she knew parents would find helpful. And we said we could prepare a leaflet giving kind of evidence-based answers to the questions that parents had about how to cope with their circumstances. And this worker, who was involved in humanitarian bread supply, said, we can put the leaflets in with the bread. So here you can see one of the workers with a bread wrapper, including a leaflet and a questionnaire and a pen. Next slide, please. The leaflets gave brief information on how to look after a child or children through conflict and displacement. These leaflets have been taken up very widely, and they're on the Welsh trauma page, for example, for families coming from Ukraine. What the leaflet covers is, for the parent, what you might be experiencing, so the sorts of stresses that they're likely to be feeling and their own reactions to that, and what they can do to help themselves. So some trauma-informed advice on what they can do to help themselves through the circumstances. And about your child, what might your child be experiencing? What can you do to help your child? So keeping them safe, giving them warmth and support, specific labelled praise, spending time together and talking, encouraging play and maintaining a routine. All really basic evidence-based approaches to enhancing parenting. Next slide, please. And with the study that we did with the humanitarian workers in Syria, they were able to deliver 3,000 bread bags into Syria over 2 days, going out to conflict zones. And we asked whether questionnaires could be returned through the bakeries that were distributing the bread to lists of families in their neighbourhoods. We were amazed to have a return rate of nearly 60%, and the families were really positive about the leaflets. They found them really helpful. So although to us having a leaflet may not seem very much, the feedback that they were writing was really important. They were saying how helpful it was that they had to have some clear pointers on what they should be doing to help their children. And one of the things that they said was they wanted more information in the same sort of paper-based format. Next slide, please. Sorry, just to continue on the leaflets, just more recently in relation to the Ukraine conflict, singer-songwriter, Ukrainian singer-songwriter Irina Karpa has made a video, a little audio of this that's available on YouTube. So it's the leaflet being read aloud, so parents can actually hear it. And we have that in several languages on the UNODC website. So we hope that's going to make it more accessible. Next, please. So the parents were asking for more detailed information, and we came up with a booklet, which we call Caring for Children Through Conflict and Displacement. It gives much more detail on coping with children who've experienced trauma, and for parents on coping with their own emotions, and gives a lot of basic parenting advice as well. And alongside that, we developed a little PowerPoint presentation so that a group of non-experts can sit down with the booklet, work their way through it, and work through the strategies. And that's been trialled in Nablus in Palestine, and we've published information on that as well. Next slide, please. The final intervention I'm going to talk about is Teaching Recovery Techniques plus Parenting. It's a programme that was developed by the Children of War Foundation and has been used very widely across the world, with families in conflict zones and who've experienced displacement, also including natural disasters. And the original programme has 5 child sessions and 2 parent sessions. We enhanced that by including the kind of parenting information that we put into the leaflet and booklets. And we made a set programme which then has 5 children's sessions and 5 parent sessions. And that's teaching recovery techniques plus parenting. Next slide, please. And that's been tested out initially with Syrian families in Turkey, and then we ran a randomized control trial with Syrian refugee families in Lebanon, with 120 families taking part. And what we found in that was that children showed improvements in their trauma symptoms with teaching recovery techniques, but there are enhanced effects and also effects for caregivers using the TRT plus parenting component. So with the integrated programme, parents also showed reduction in their depression, their stress, they showed improvements in their parenting skills, and they also showed changes in the levels of trauma-related stress that they reported. So overall, it was seen to be a programme that benefits the whole family, well, certainly the child and parent, as opposed to the more individual teaching recovery techniques programme. So that's a programme that's really well worth considering and now has a considerable evidence base behind it. Next slide.
Rachel, sorry to interrupt, just a couple of minutes left for your presentation.
Left, yes, and a couple of slides to go, thanks. So for you thinking about what programmes to use, I think it's really important to consider the age of children, the sorts of experiences they've had, how settled they are where they are now and for how long they're settled, thinking about the interventions, how the intervention has been developed, whether it has a theory of change underlying it, so what the theoretical basis is. Is there an evidence base? And a randomised controlled trial is the gold standard. Think about the design and feasibility of actually using the programme, the training requirements, and the sort of infrastructure that you need to be able to use the materials or programmes as well. There's some really nice kind of immediate brief interventions available on Parenting for Lifelong Health, which is an Oxford University programme. On our own university website, there's information on teaching recovery techniques, and on the UNODC website, you'll find all the leaflets that I've talked about and the videos as well. There's also a really nice programme, the Caregiver Support Intervention, which is worth looking at. That's not quite so widely distributed yet, but there's good evidence base. Next slide, please. So whatever you do, there's a crucial need for family skills training and support for families who've been through conflicts and multiple challenges. And the investment in a carefully adapted, theory-driven, evidence-based programme has the potential to be really valuable. Next slide. And just to say thank you to everybody who's been involved in all the work on this and all the developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and we'll share some of these links in our post-event comms. Peter and Sharon, can I call you to the virtual stage next?
Thank you, Julia. And thanks, Rachel. I'm sure we'll actually be using and researching an awful lot of what you've just presented in our work with asylum-seeking families. Our work, I guess, I'm Peter Watt. I'm acting head of centre at Church Street Family Hub in Westminster. We're a family hub very close to the Paddington area of Westminster in the northeast, and I'll be delivering this presentation with Sharon Blake, who's one of our family navigators, who's part of our early help system, part of our family hub offer. Next slide, please. So our starting points. This story really started back during the pandemic. It was during one of the lockdowns in October 2020. Not many services face-to-face with families at that point. A local primary school had alerted the local authorities' early help service to a group of 42 asylum-seeking families placed in a Paddington hotel by the Home Office. Those families were presenting with multiple needs, very complex needs, and the hotel and the school were feeling quite overwhelmed and weren't sure what to do. So as an early help system, as a group of family hubs, because there's 3 in Westminster, the leadership got together and thought through how we might support. What was helping and what helped in that context was the fact that Westminster had an already established early help strategy in place that had been co-produced. We heard about co-production and the importance of it a bit earlier in the conference, but we had lots of agencies signed up to a particular approach to supporting families. And we had a newly formed integrated leadership team at Church Street Family Hub. That was important in terms of permission giving for practitioners and to get involved. But it also meant that we had quite a rich and diverse partnership locally. To cut to the end, our outcome has been that we've had an established team around the hotel, which is a huge network of professionals and practitioners supporting the families at the hotel. Over 120 families and a large number of children supported over the last 2 years. So next slide, please. So who we're currently working with, we started with 1 hotel. We're now supporting families across 3 hotels in the Paddington area, 62 families in total. As I said, 120 over the last 2 years. Countries of origin could take up a whole page because families are coming from all over the world. But what we've essentially established is a system whereby every family has an allocated and named practitioner across the network. But crucially, that's coordinated through our team around the hotel meetings that are coordinated by Sharon Blake, our family navigator. We operate as a team. Next slide, please. Before I speak about family needs a little, it might be worth thinking about the process in which we started the work. So back in October 2020, when we had the pandemic, it took it didn't actually take an awful lot of convincing to get our Children's Centre outreach practitioners involved and our family navigators involved, because we'd already been talking about the value of us being responsive to our local community. That was part of our early help and family hub development. But as a leadership group, we still felt it was important to demonstrate some of the practice that we wanted to see more of, to be creative, to be flexible. And so I visited the hotel with a number of practitioners who'd volunteered to essentially screen the needs of all those families who arrived, give them a listening ear, but also assess who needed what most immediately. What we discovered, I'm sure, will not be much of a surprise, that all of the families needed access to sort of education, so schools and nurseries, all needed sort of connecting with local GPs, health visiting, midwifery, and hospital treatment, some. All had material needs, so clothing, shoes, toiletries, baby items. All had experienced trauma, were feeling displaced, and were feeling quite isolated. Trauma also, not just through the experiences that they'd had in their home countries, but also through the journey itself. We heard time and again how traumatic that had been in itself. Families were bored. They had very little to do, so there was a need for some activities. And IT support and IT poverty was really significant at the hotel. Next slide, please. So over the last 2 years, we've built up. We decided that actually the best way of doing this and the best way of approaching this was as a team, as a network, and to use the connections that we'd established through our family hub development creatively. And so this is a list of all the partners that are currently involved, and they're there are more being added every day, because people tend to put their hands up very quickly to support these families, which is very heartening. I'll pick out two which were particularly important. One was the hotel management and staff. They were absolutely crucial to get on board, form a relationship with, establish some clear expectations around what it is that we could offer, and how we wanted to work together to support these families. That's been a really hard one, but essential relationship in this process. And the other was the primary school, because the primary school, although they were feeling overwhelmed, they'd already been part of our early help systems work, and had described themselves still as a trauma-informed school. So they were not just saying we need help, they were saying, what more can we do to help these families? We want to understand them better, we want to support them really effectively in our setting. I'm going to hand it over to Sharon now to talk a little bit more about the coordination roles and some of the experiences of the families that we've been supporting.
Hello everybody, my name is Sharon Blake. I am a family navigator for Westminster Council based at the Family Hub. I think Peter's given a really good overall of what we've done and what we were doing. Could I have the next slide, please? I think one of the big things to mention here before I talk about just some navigator-led initiatives is that these families are on £8 a week. Because they live in the hotel and they're given breakfast, lunch and dinner, they're actually not entitled to any public funds, so they're on £8. And it's Paddington, so it's very expensive. I went and had a Fanta one day and they charged me over £2. So even just, you know, getting a drink and that in central London, as you know, is really expensive. So I just think it's really important for you to know the situation that they're in. A couple of ones that we picked out, I might go off a little bit because I'm very passionate about what we do here at Westminster. So excuse me if I do go off a little bit, but first one is I put down oral health support sessions because it was after COVID. Well, during COVID and after COVID, as you know, dentists weren't taking any NHS patients on. And we had children that had come from countries where they'd never had their teeth looked at and were in such pain. So we couldn't get dentists. It was really hard at that point. So going out of our way trying to find charities, and we actually found a charity that came in. They assessed all the children's teeth for lots of dentists, and then they actually took 2 days of their time for all the children and their families to go and to actually give them treatment. ESOL lessons, that was really important, and I can put that in the women's conversation groups as well. As soon as all the families would come here, they wanted to learn English. They wanted to integrate. Now the children, as you know, they go to school and they just pick it up like that, you know, but the parents were like, we want to learn English, we want to integrate. So we worked with charities. I found a charity of university students and they were coming every Wednesday. And luckily for us, as Peter was saying, we had a really good partnership with the hotel, which was really important, so we could use any rooms that they had. And we had ESOL lessons for mums and dads, and the children would come, and that we would have a section for children because obviously childcare, and that was really, really important. As well as the way it says women conversation groups, it wasn't just conversations, it was we were doing things. So we were sitting there one day and I was talking to the women, and I kind of realized that these women have skills, you know, they make jewelry, they do hair, like, and I was like, right, okay, let's do something. Because once the women would drop their children off at school, that's when they would sit in their rooms and they would think about the trauma that they've been through. They don't have any money to go anywhere. And it was about, you know, getting everybody together so that we could all the women and dads, you know, could support each other. So we would have these women groups and they would make jewelry and things like that. We had a Zumba lesson, and I remember turning up thinking it wouldn't be, you know, well, let's just say I nearly passed out, you know, professional Zumba. So yeah, you know, but it was great because this is what the women want. They wanted to do things, they wanted to feel worthy, they wanted to feel that they're contributing something. So that was really important. And when we're at these sessions, people then would talk about their experiences, about what they've been through, to other women that have been through the same situation. And from that, I could actually work out what support these women might need. We've got here about free football, horse riding, in partnership with North Paddington Youth Club, who've been amazing. They do great trips, and we felt it was really important for our young people to be able to experience something. They've been through so much. So making contact with North Paddington and also another youth club called Four Feathers. We made sure that the children, when I say children, were obviously 0 to 19, had somewhere that they could go and also go on trips. And yeah, it's just amazing just seeing them smile and, you know, going on these trips, etc. Sourcing funding for Oyster cards, school uniforms. So yeah, the Oyster cards, as you can imagine, £8 a week, no money to travel. So it was about working with charities, because in London you can get an Oyster card and you can travel free, but you have to have the money up front to get the Oyster card, or Zip cards I think they're called. So it's just really important to be able to connect with people, get some funding for that. And it also gave the teenagers a bit of freedom, so they could go to the youth clubs, they could go out, they could, you know, with their friends, instead of being cooped up in a hotel room, which I must say they're very small hotel rooms, and they could have up to 4 to 5 people in there. Very small. So it was really important. And the Young Westminster Foundation were great with school uniform, supporting us. I'm being part of a lot of WhatsApp groups, as you can imagine, asking for school uniform and trainers and stuff. And you put the call out there and everybody wanted to help. So it was really good that we had that support. And here it's got Drumming in the Park, in partnership with Westminster Trauma Lead, intensive support team. So for me, it was really important to use my skills to work with other departments within Westminster, children's services and beyond. So for example, the intensive support team, I spoke to them about what happened. They'd done, as Pete said, some workshops for the hotel volunteers, but also for our Care for Calais partners that I made contact with, which we thought was really, really important to give them more of an understanding. But so we're getting contact with all the departments in Westminster, Children's Services, and an example of that would be admissions for schools. So a lot of the parents that come over here, the first thing they ask me is, Sharon, school please, because they, you know, they've left their country because they want a better life for their children, which we all would do. But what they want, first of all, is a school. So there's lots of forms to fill in, as we all know, lots of families. So it was about building that relationship with admissions, so that sometimes we didn't have to do the forms. We could just, and now still, we can just send them the names. They know the hotel address. They know that they can work on that. They've got relationship with schools as well. And also, if there's no secondary spaces, which is in Westminster very hard, they go to a panel and the head teachers all know about the situation. So that was, you know, really, really important as well. I think
Sharon, sorry, just to interrupt you, you've just got a minute or so left.
Okay, right, just really quick. So I just want to...
Sorry, Sharon, I think that's for me too.
Okay, I just want to end it on that. This is relationship built. And just to remember that you're going to be the first person that they may have met that hasn't got high vis or a uniform on. So a smile goes a long way. So
thank you, Sharon. Brilliantly put, as always. Can I have the last slide up? Thank you. So just in terms of our learning from a family hub perspective, because we're continuing to learn with this really complex group of families. But I think that one of the things that's worked very well is having an integrated approach, such as Team Around, can be efficient. It's making the best use of local resources. It's ethical. It's self-supporting. So groups of professionals and volunteers it's established with a kind of common purpose, can be really effectively helping each other. Can be dynamic and responsive. So I can't think of anything more creative than what we actually did in response to these needs. Coordination, though, is really key, and I think Family Hub should lead on these sorts of initiatives locally and build up the skills if they need to, which allow them to, and you do that through the doing, I think, in most cases. Again, back to Rachel's presentation, but the important, and from what Sharon said, the real importance of humanising services for families, and that many of the families that we were supporting were only going to be with us for 2 to 3 months before being relocated across the country. So we really wanted to give them an experience which they could then take into other local authorities and step forward into support when they needed it. Our integrated leadership teams locally can give permission to practitioners to get involved in this sort of way of working. Mobilising community support builds capacity, that's obvious, but it's really been vital for this community. The volunteers across the Church Street area and Paddington area, and their involvement has been really significant. And back to where I started, a co-produced local authority-wide early help family hub strategy really helps pull this stuff together. It addresses conflicts of interest. It addresses challenges and blocks that we might get from particular partners, but it does actually present some real positivity in working with very vulnerable communities.
Thank you so much, Peter and Sharon. If I could ask Caroline and Becky to pop their cameras and sound on now. Hello.
Hi, morning. My name is Becky Humphreys and I'm a specialist health visitor for complex and vulnerable families within the 0 to 19 service of Newcastle.
Hi, and I'm Caroline Herbert. I'm the locality lead for the North locality in Newcastle, and I work for Action for Children, so we're one of the commission partners in the city under the broader Children and Families Newcastle banner. Today we're going to give a bit of an example of how we've been working in Newcastle. I'm really interested that we were also calling it a team around the hotel, along very similar lines to Westminster. So forgive us if it seems a bit repetitious. Okay, next slide, please. So just to kind of re-ground ourselves in really what the definition of an asylum seeker is. And so we have the United Nations definition here, and to remember that all the people that we've been supporting within the hotel in Newcastle have experienced those things that we've already been hearing about, but also have arrived through illegal routes, which puts them in a particular category in terms of the Home Office and the response that they will receive. And some of that has led to us feeling like we're filling a gap that the Home Office and more statutory services should be providing, but also has given us an opportunity to be really creative and to respond to need. Okay, next slide, please.
As you can see, this is the model for our team around the hotel. It really is a collaborative approach where we meet regularly. Everybody that you can see within the circles there, we meet regularly once a week, and so 0 to 19 are part of that. And there's also a separate health meeting that all of health providers attend, and that's both acute and community services, incorporating the integrated care board too. So it really is a full team around the hotel that does strive to meet the needs, all of the needs, both health and social, of those families within the hotel. Next slide, please.
I realise we're making it hard for you, Bronya. The spotlight's back to me. Okay, so looking at a bit more detail at how we've coordinated the family hub support around the hotel. The structural response that we have, so overarching everything, Newcastle is a city of sanctuary. We're very proud of that status that we have, and we're I think one of the first places in the country to have a dedicated coordinator role, looking at the being the city of sanctuary and making that a living experience for people, and also providing a way for the voices of those who newly arrived in Newcastle can inform policy and can inform how we do things. It's also meant that we've got an established network between voluntary sector partners, between health, between early help and children's social care that was there to pull on already, and that has provided a route both for escalating any difficulties, eliminating blocks, but also for quickly mobilising support. We've got the statutory response around school places. So again, our school effectiveness team and our dedicated worker within that team are part of the team around the hotel. So school places can be, again, really quickly mobilised to find the right places. And one particular primary school has been absolutely fantastic in that. We also have an education psychologist who works with newly arrived international families, and his contribution has meant that, again, we've had a sort of fast track to psychological assessments where those have been needed, and he's also been able to upskill and increase the capacity of other teams within the city in terms of trauma-informed approaches and understanding the needs of families who are perhaps within the school or within our family partner team, which has meant that although he does do some direct work with children in particular circumstances, a lot of that's done through those other people who have an ongoing relationship with that child or family. Within the family hub, as Becky's mentioned, we obviously have our health services of 0 to 19, health visiting and school nursing, who have done clear assessments at the beginning, holistic assessments to identify the needs of families, and being able to then pull in family partners who work very similar to the Westminster Family Navigator role, also pulling in nursery places. And then the wider community response that has been mobilised around, obviously, material donations of toys and clothes. We've also got in a local church hall a cook and eat session, which has a social element, but also people being able to cook food that's familiar to them. We found food at the hotel to be a very challenging area. We've also got a group of retired teachers who are offering education to those older children where we are struggling to find school places at secondary age. So we've mobilised a whole network around the hotel, and these families, who some of whom are being moved to more, not more permanent, but moved into independent accommodation within the city, but some then just disappear to other parts of the country. Again, that's one of the challenges of providing support. Okay, next slide, please.
So I think slightly different to the Westminster model is that when these families do move into the hotel, health have taken the lead on the first assessment of the family. So if there are no children within the hotel and a couple arrive, a GP would do that assessment straight away. Any families that arrive and they have children under the age of 18, then we would do that first assessment and liaise really closely with the GP. We're based in the hotel up to twice a week. GPs are also based in the hotel once a week. We do, and we have relied very heavily on our family partners to be able to carry out those assessments. And these are the numbers for the very the first 6 months of the hotel opening. Obviously, we're coming up to 12 months soon, so there will be another review within 12 months. So I'm imagining those numbers are going to be at least doubled, I think. But from the first review of the hotel, what we found was that out of the 80 children that we've carried out health assessments on, 6 of those children, the parents had paid to fly out of Nigeria. 3 of those children had moved in from Glasgow via a similar accommodation. However, 71 of those children were trafficked, where they'd experienced or witnessed abuse, exploitation, or had in fact been abused or assaulted themselves. We also identified 6 pregnant women, so we very quickly had to recruit a midwife into the hotel. And again, her role is increasing to probably once a week now too. Probably need to look at our contraception needs, I think. That would be a good point for the review. Next slide, please. So the needs that we did identify within the families that we met were, again, probably very similar to Westminster, that parents really did need to speak. They wanted to tell the story. They wanted somebody to hear what they had to say, and they needed us to sit and listen to what they had to say. Children were sometimes very shocked, presented very traumatized, very watchful, very quiet. And again, that's where we had to bring in the whole team around the hotel to be able to gather a full assessment on those children and young people, so that we're not basing our assessment on just one meeting of that family. So 11% of the parents that we met, 11% of those parents had health needs that needed further referral on, and that was acute needs. That could have been cardiology, thyroid, and also includes the mental health needs. So all of the families that come into the hotel register with one GP practice, and that GP practice luckily had just employed 2 new psychologists, and they have been really, really supportive in supporting the mental health needs of these parents. So that's been fantastic. On top of all of the 71 children that had experienced or witnessed abuse, there was 7% of those families that had experienced domestic abuse within their parents' relationship. Again, needing extra support and services to become involved for that. Very similar to what you found in Westminster, dental health was high on the agenda. So this is not dental health as in dental caries, the need. They were all provided with oral health packs, every single person that came in. However, this was real dental trauma from children with dental trauma from assault, dental trauma from banging their face on the boat, on travelling over. And they were referred into the dental hospital and seen very quickly, and their needs were addressed very, very quickly. Healthy weight has been a concern within the hotel. 9% of the children that we've assessed, and we weigh them monthly, have been underweight and continue to be underweight as well, and continue to lose weight. 5% of the children and young people have presented with development delay. So this development delay does not include the children and young people that we've identified as needing paediatric assessment for their health needs. Again, what we've had to do is really rely on our team around the hotel to support us in carrying out that development assessment of the child and young person. As I've said, it's been really difficult, brand new into the country, all of the trauma that they've experienced, and they're presented with 2 women in blue uniforms sitting in front of them asking their parents questions about their health, or trying to engage them in questions about their health. So we have relied on the partners, the family partners, when they've been supporting the families into the local community. They've been able to then report back to us around development and concerns that we've initially been able to identify. So that's been a real true partnership working, and something I'm really proud of for the best of those children and young people. Next slide, please. So just a case study that I wanted to talk about, which was just before so the hotel had literally just opened and GP had been into the hotel. However, GP goes in on a Wednesday and we go in on a Friday, so we hadn't actually gotten to that point yet. So I received an email from one of our community paediatricians from our local hospital to say that she'd seen this family. GP had made the assessment and sent this young person up to the local hospital, Great North Children's Hospital. So then we arranged to see this little girl on the Friday. She'd been discharged with some medication, but in need of a holistic assessment and global development assessment. We seen her on the Friday. She was 5 years old and she was carried into the room. to be assessed. She was unable to walk. She had no movement in her lower limbs at all. She couldn't sit, had no speech, very, very disabled, presented as a very, very disabled young girl with an unknown origin of why she presented this way. Clearly in need of a huge medical team around her, and also in need of parents and whole family were in need of extra support to be able to support their little girl. Parents were brilliant, open to any assessment, just kind of ran with what we had suggested. You know, I always think how daunting it must be for that family to come in and say, right, I need an OT assessment, I need a physio assessment, I need a speech and language assessment, I need an educational psychologist assessment, I need a general paediatric assessment on top of the antibiotics and medication that you'd received in the hospital, and then to have no equipment to be able to mobilise this little girl in a hotel that was over 3 floors. Home Office were involved. Everybody that you've seen in the team around the hotel was involved straight away with this family. We then had devised an early help plan, and that again was to support this family to move out of the hotel. They were placed in a new home in Newcastle. That unfortunately that was unsuitable. They were placed in a upstairs flat with stairs and no way of getting this family, this little girl, up and down the stairs safely. So again, that relied on the team around the hotel, the early help plan, and the support systems there to support that family to get that little girl, well, to get that family into a suitable accommodation, which is what we did really quite quickly. And I think Caroline's going to talk about all of the support from the early help team.
Okay.
Just before you do, Caroline, can I just interrupt and say you've got a couple of minutes?
Okay, that's fine. I'll be brief. Okay, so as Becky has set the scene for this family, clearly they were really struggling to meet the needs of their child, and that was being compounded by the lack of forethought by the housing provider commissioned by the Home Office. So once those things began to be solved, we were able to bring in the help of the education psychologist who really fast-tracked the assessment through to a specialist school place for the child, and that assessment place, again, I think it's having those routes into a bit of a fast track, because we don't have the time with families. We know there are huge waiting lists and nobody should be waiting for help, but sometimes it's felt like the needs are so acute, we need to be able to have these kind of quicker routes through systems, and maybe that's giving us some learning for how everybody needs a quicker route through systems. So that's been interesting. So as well as the education placement that's continuing now and is really beneficial for her, the family partners were able to support the family materially. So through Action for Children, we have an emergency fund that we've been able to access for all of the families, giving them resettlement packs and those kind of things. But also, and probably more crucially, was able to bring the family into contact in the local family hub, so somewhere that they can continue to go to seek support and just to have fun. So social activities, the cook and eat sessions that I mentioned earlier, but also a culture exchange, language cafe, those kind of low-level activities and opportunities to meet people that have been really important for a family feeling that they can settle in Newcastle. And that early help plan and the support of the whole team will continue now that they're staying longer term in Newcastle. So thank you for your attention, and we're moving on to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline and Becky. We're going to attempt a bit of a slide switcheroo now.
Thank you. So I'm Beck Ferrari and I work for the UK Trauma Council, which is one of the projects that sits within the Anna Freud Centre. I'm here to talk to you about supporting families. And first, I'll just give you a little introduction to the UK Trauma Council. we're an organisation, a charity essentially, that works to improve the support that children and young people and families that have experienced trauma will receive. And we do that not by doing the direct work ourselves at the UK Trauma Council, but by providing the best available evidence to enable professionals and frontline workers to know the best ways to respond that promote recovery and really support children and young people that have been through trauma. If you're interested, have a look at our website at some point and you'll find some lots of free resources and guidance, and we offer some training as well. So if you're interested in how trauma affects a child's developing brain, or how loss and trauma might affect the way a child grieves, you can find some particular bits of information there. We try and work with the people who, the intended audience for our resources, and also with children and young people with lived experience where we can, to make sure we're really understanding their needs and talking about them in the way that they want to be spoken about and their experiences described. Really strong push for all our guidance and resources to be evidence-based, and we're really so fortunate to be supported by the council members that sit from different roles in academia and research and psychology and psychiatry, and leading non-governmental organisations that really help us steer our focus. That's what we do at the UK Trauma Council. We had a discussion, Julia and I, about whether my presentation would come at the beginning or the end, and actually I'm really glad I've come at the end, because I'm hoping I'm able to give a kind of a bit of an evidence base for all the brilliant work that Rachel and Peter and Sharon and Caroline and Becky have spoken about. But I just want to mention language, because I think we're all learning, aren't we? We're all learning how to develop services that support and learning how to be inclusive in our practice. And so delighted to hear all these amazing things that have been going on. There's a real push away from describing people by their legal status. So we're working at the UK Trauma Council to work out which terms do we think best describe people in ways that don't kind of perpetuate stereotypes. So I'm going to have a go with that, but do let me know where I can improve, so that that can really inform the work that we do at the UK Trauma Council. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of kind of how trauma might affect children, young people, families affected by forced displacement. And then we'll really think about the principles for what helps after trauma and the action, and then hopefully I can pick up on some of the points that the presentations before have covered. So I think it's really important for us to understand something of the trauma that families have experienced, and that can be hugely challenging because we don't want to re-traumatize families by asking them loads of invasive questions about what they've been through. But certainly I know that both of those organisations this morning have talked about families that have wanted to tell you about, so inviting those opportunities and being a listener there and really learning so that we're better informed about their experiences of trauma pre-migration in the country which they had to flee, during their journey, peri-migration, what happened to them on the journey that they took, often perilous to arrive in the UK, but also the trauma of arriving. And I think it was Sharon who mentioned that you might be the first people they see who haven't got high-vis jackets on. And how that might be perceived, and whether that feels like a traumatic experience, their first moments and days, and the whole asylum seeking system in terms of continuing their feeling of trauma. How might trauma impact them? I know that Rachel shared some really great insight there into us, but thinking about families and how they might be feeling really anxious and nervous and fearful, we might see their mood being affected, and that they become far more withdrawn from others around them. And I know that you talked about hotel accommodation and how easy is it to become, to actually make those connections that might be useful. That children particularly might be increasingly irritable, becoming more argumentative, quick to anger, having more tantrums that are out of character for the child they were before they experienced all these things. We see those problems in concentrating and engaging, and we'll have a think about in a minute why that might be this case and how that can affect sleep, which might be disturbed, or lots of nightmares, difficult to focus, loss of interest in everyday life. And just great to hear about how your organisations and services are really trying to mobilise interest in everyday life by providing not just the the basic essentials, but actually some enriching experience as well. These are actually normal responses to trauma. They're what we would expect. And many children, young people and families will recover over time, particularly where they're then in an environment where they're not being re-traumatized. But we need to be alert to where young people might not recover particularly. And we think one of the ways that trauma particularly affects us is it affects our belief in ourselves and the way we see ourselves and the way we see others and the way we see the world around us. So trauma might affect a child or a young person, or indeed their parents, and then start to believe that they're vulnerable because of what's happened to them. They might start to believe that other people are unpredictable and not to be trusted, and they might start to feel that nowhere is safe. They fled a country in a place where there was conflict, but actually maybe now they feel that even arriving in the UK, nowhere is safe. And that has a really profound effect on children and young people. And when those difficulties persist, then we see that maybe it's not such a expected response to trauma, but we might see the kind of development of longer term mental health needs, particularly around anxiety and low mood. We might see some more risky behaviour in terms of harming themselves or feeling not able to, not wanting to stay alive. And then we might also see some presentations of PTSD, some particular trauma presentations there. What might they look like? We look at this whole triad here of difficulties that people experience after trauma. The first being these intrusive thoughts, these flashbacks that come into your mind and make you not just remember what happened, but relive and re-experience it with the same horror and fear or whatever you felt at the time. Now, of course, if you're reliving that experience, you're going to work pretty hard to try and avoid it, to try and put it out of your mind and avoid anything that reminds you of it. And doing that, having this kind of boomerang, I often think, between the thoughts and then wanting to avoid it, can leave you feeling really hypervigilant and alert and on edge and irritable and difficult to regulate your emotions. And then because of all that's happening, and that's really colouring your belief in the world and yourself and others around you. So just kind of holding on to the way that trauma might impact, which are all the things that you're seeing in some of those families, but kind of thinking about it from a real trauma-informed lens there. Just want to share with you 5 principles that come from a paper by Stephen Hopful, and they're really helpful because they brought together the best practice that had been gathered over years of seeing how children, young people, families respond to trauma and what really helps them. And from across a whole variety of papers and bits of research, they found that there were 5 key ingredients, as it were, that can really help. And you can see them listed there. So I'm just going to go through them really briefly, thinking about a sense of safety, because trauma shatters your belief that the world is a safe place or the place where you're living. And then when you have repeated trauma, as you might do if you experience conflict and displacement and a perilous journey, then that can add to your belief that the world is not a safe place. How can we kind of promote a sense of safety where it might feel that still many things in a family is life are uncertain when they're living in temporary accommodation and they're waiting for their asylum system to kind of be processed and wondering where they're going to be moved to. But we know that experience a sense of safety. So we're not talking about absolute safety in a perfect level, but even a sense of safety can really help families start to maintain a more balanced view that that happened and that was dangerous, but actually there are people helping me now. And I really loved some of the things that were happening there to really help families feel safe. I know Rachel spoke about the TRT programme, teaching recovery techniques, which really works on finding a sense of safety and a sense of calm, amongst other things. And I think that work that you've been doing in Westminster, actually by training up the hotel staff, that helps with that sense of safety, doesn't it? Because you feel that people understand you. If you feel that the adults and the professionals around you understand you, it's easy to feel that sense of safety. Our second principle is about feeling calm. We know that trauma experiences kind of trigger that fight, flight, freeze response. And then even when the threat has diminished and gone away, you stay in that heightened state of alertness and distress. We've talked about the sleep and how it can interfere with not just the daytime and concentration, but also asleep. So thinking about things that we can do with families that help them find ways to have a sense of calm, not absolute calm again, but a sense of calm enough, feeling calm enough And I think we can draw on things around breathing and mindfulness and grounding and muscle relaxation. But I think it's really important that we respond to families' interests and their culture, so that we draw on things that are actually meaningful to them, rather than the things that I've learnt in my white Western culture here, so that we really think about what's culturally sensitive. Think about connection, because often trauma makes you isolated. The experience often can be singular, but even when it isn't, you could feel isolated. And we know that that's a risk factor, particularly for the onset of post-traumatic stress. So we know that connection and social support really helps. And I loved hearing about all the different ways in which you're facilitating connection, just by having your women's conversations groups and meeting together. And you're really seeing that not only is that good and valuable, but actually that sense of connection, and can also help with social division, which can really occur after where there's been persecution and discrimination. So we can really help that sense of connection there. Sense of control. I think after you've been through trauma, you can feel, if you're feeling vulnerable and the world is not a safe place, that can really undermine your own sense of autonomy and your own sense that you've got any power or control to influence yourself and your community and what's happened to you. And I loved hearing about, I'm just looking down because I was making some notes here, loved hearing about just the simple things like the cook and eat sessions that you've been doing in Newcastle, and letting people cook their own food that's familiar. That gives you a sense of control, that I'm not just beholden to services and what they're providing me with. Wherever we can give choice and autonomy and a sense that I can make decisions for myself, we empower people to better overcome their trauma and better kind of become survivors of it rather than victims of it. And then finally, this last principle is a sense of hope. So we know that trauma shatters our beliefs and can lead us feeling really heightened distress and despair. And I guess this sense of hope isn't about dismissing what's happened and saying, oh, well, it's happened and it's gone and you're in a safe country now. It is about acknowledging and validating that experience, but also holding on to some reasonable hope, finding that there's something around the now and something about the future that they might be able to hold on to. And again, the presentations earlier really helped with that feeling, because you can't feel hopeful if you don't feel safe, can you? So you've got to have your basic needs met, but then thinking about, as you're supporting families, how can you promote that sense of hope? So I think Jo, who's helping us here, is going to help us with a Mentimeter. So I'm going to ask you this question about naming one thing you already do in your service that will help promote the principles for recovery. So I wonder whether those of you on the call, whether you're in a family hub or whether you're in another service that kind of works with families, you could think about one thing you already do that promotes the principles for recovery. So really, my presentation today, and I think that kind of joint mission as a group of people speaking with you today, is about thinking about the work that you can do to promote those principles. I'm going to very quickly mention three great organisations that work in very different ways, but I think are brilliant at bringing these principles to life in action. First one is based in Glasgow, where there's a brilliant charity called Refugee, which is really passionate about making people feel that you're being embraced, and they do lots of the basic needs. About, you know, you can go and donate lots of toiletries and prams and clothing and things, but they also do a lot around choice and control. They're really aware of people's experiences, so you book an appointment to go so that you're not overwhelmed by being around lots of people. I'm going to mention Kent Refugee Action Network, who at the UK Trauma Council we're working and partnering with, and the brilliant work they do with young people that have been separated from their families, and particularly around education. And they recognise that some will cope in mainstream schools straight away, some might need to be educated within their centre, and some, in one of the colleges, they've got a little hub. So whilst those young people go into college, they can go into that hub where they feel they're just that little bit more safe, feel connected to those who they think understand them. And then I'm going to mention a really new organisation that launched just a few months ago called Bear Us in Mind. If you're looking for things to do with families, you can download all the ideas for a psychological toolkit to enable you to use some everyday things like teddies and stones and drawing things to really support children's psychological well-being. as they're settling in your area. And then the second Mentimeter question is one thing you hope to do, and we're hoping to finish on it with a sense of hope, but I wonder whether you might be able to name something that you hope to develop in your service that hopes to promote these principles of recovery. I'm here really because our new set of resources is around children and young people who've been impacted by trauma following displacement, and we're looking at developing resources for educational communities as well as social care, and some resources for young people themselves to understand and make sense of the trauma they've been through. If you're interested and want to know more, we're at the beginning stages of it, but feel free to email on the email address below, and then we can see whether there are ways that your organisation might be able to kind of work with us or be really helpful consultants with us on the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beck. And we've gone a couple of minutes over time, but there was such interesting and informative presentations. I've shared some links from the earlier presentation that Rachel did, as well as the UK Trauma Council's contact email address in the chat if anyone's interested in getting in touch. We'll also send this out in the post-event comms, and please do reach out to us here in the National Centre anytime if you have any questions or wanted to follow any of this up. So I'm going to let everyone go to lunch now. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you to Rachel and Peter and Sharon, Caroline, Becky and Beck for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. Thank you.